Hi, welcome to Freeplay. This session is the panel Why So Serious? Games as More Than Entertainment. I'm Ben, I'm the Freeplay coordinator for this year. First, before the panel begins, I'd like to acknowledge that Freeplay is host and broadcast from the stolen lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. Land was never seceded. When stories have been shared and games have been played since time immemorial, we pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and to anybody watching that has a connection with the world's oldest continuing culture. The Freeplay also stands in solidarity with the Black communities both here and around the world against prejudice, injustice, and violence. Black Lives Matter is not a new or revolutionary statement, but it's one that needs to be said and said again and said louder. Also, this is the first session of the day, and I'd like to quickly thank our sponsors, City Melbourne, VMO, VoiceWorks, Mountains, Hipster Whale, and League of Geeks. Without their support, we couldn't run the festivals. Now I'll pass it over to Hailey.
Thanks, Ben. So hi, I'm Hailey Cooperrider. I'm moderating, also participating today. And so a little context before I introduce the rest of the panelists. So if you're here for the Why So Serious stream, some of the topics that we crystallized around for this panel were, what do we even mean by this word? Serious games, what does it look like? Is there a risk there of actually creating a false division between games that are serious and games that are not? What might that mean? You know, how can we work with that or work around that? But also a sort of parallel stream around how are serious games actually being used out there in the world? How are they being sold? How can designers actually work and sell their skills as part of a serious games marketplace? And how might serious games be used in the future? So where might this sort of corner of the game design reality go? One other note is that we're taking a slightly different approach with the panel. We're going to ask for your questions up front in a process. So I'm a facilitator by trade in a process that I've called question storming. So we're going to ask you to dump all of your questions into the YouTube live chat, and our team will be mining those, and actually I'm going to show you putting them into this virtual whiteboard using the tool Miro, and we'll be creating bundles of topic areas so we can get a better picture of what you're actually here to learn about, and then we will respond to that as a panel. So start, putting your thinking caps on about what questions you might have. Feel free to put them in the channel now. But to get you more introduced to our panelists, I'm going to start with short introductions. So I'm Hailey Cooperrider. I work in the field primarily of collaboration, facilitating large organizations and small groups around getting an outcome that they want, increasingly interested in serious games. So I have worked on a game as part of a project to bring together the Australian food and agriculture industry around a kind of a shared vision and roadmap for a more sustainable future. That became part of a process for how they decided on what projects they wanted to work on with the highest priority. And a serious game that I like, and so this is the invitation to each panelist, a game you've worked on and a game you like. A serious game that I like is one called Paying for Predictions, which uses hidden information and auctions to convince decision makers and governments that they should actually pay attention to rainfall data and predictive data when they're planning for potential floods. And that was actually used by the Red Cross to convince people to use data more effectively. So next, why don't we start with Steve D.
Hello, I'm Steve D. I am the president of Tin Star Games, where we make role-playing games and board games. A game that I've worked on that was serious is a game called It Is Forbidden, which is a story-building game for two groups that explores how cultures come together and clash and why they clash, and how our inbuilt assumptions can be extremely challenged by different cultures and how we can deal with that. A serious game that I like is a board game that came out last year, I think, called Holding On, which is about a person who is dying from a terminal disease, and you as the players must balance his emotional care with his medical care.
Cool. Cool. How about Eris?
Hi, I'm Eris. So my day job is a graphic designer for the Salvation Army, but I've been fortunate enough to also work on a few projects with them as a game designer, and I've also done some other freelance stuff. One major game that I did was called Just Chocolate, and it was designed as a way to help players think about the decisions they make when they buy products, in this case, buying chocolate from the supermarket, and finding out if it's ethically sourced or they don't know where it's come from and if it's exploiting people in its production. So that was one game I worked on. And a game that I think is much maligned but really good for educational stuff is actually Monopoly. And it's the original incarnation, which was the Landlord's game. And so it was created about 100 years ago. And the original intent of the design was to teach people how a specific tax and a certain taxing system and land ownership system was problematic and had problems and ways to maybe deal with it. And then it was obviously adopted by Parker Brothers and whatever and turned into Monopoly. But I think even the game now, the current version, has a lot of educational potential for parents and teachers to tell kids, how some of the practices that are represented in the game are really problematic and can lead to change if we think about them differently. So, yeah.
Okay, great. How about Nick? You haven't gone yet.
Hi. My name is Nick Argall, and I develop games for corporate and institutional clients. The most recent thing that I worked on is Real Talk for Alfred Health, which is a card game used by their HR department to help managers understand how to talk to people within the hospital. A game that I really like is Moving Out, which is a very silly game, but I think it has some really useful, serious applications in terms of teamwork and representation.
Cool. Thanks, Nick. Over to James.
Hello. Oh. Am I appearing?
There's a delay, so if you're looking at the YouTube wondering.
No, I'm on the Zoom, but nonetheless, hello everyone. My name is James, and I am an immersive experience designer for the Puzzle Maker. I recently worked with Half Monster Games on a sort of site activation game called the Great Goma Heist, which Goma is an art gallery in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia. And the goal of that game was to sort of get people into the space and playing this sort of like tag versus hide and seek game, while also learning and engaging with the art around them, actually having to draw the game, and then sort of there's a bit of subterfuge with the other players. So that was a lot of fun. And a serious game that I like is called Virtual Reef Diving. It was designed by my friend Jack Ford Morgan for ASEMS, the Queensland University of Technology Statistics Department, to teach children about sort of coral health and reef health up in the Great Barrier Reef.
Okay, awesome. Look, we've got some questions coming in, but we could really use more questions to build out a rich landscape for us to talk through. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch my view and show you our Miro board. And we've got definitely something emerging around what is a serious game, what makes them serious. We've got some values questions. Is gamification evil? Who are serious games? Thanks, Maze. Who are serious games targeted towards? And does anyone have any questions that are a bit more out there or not covering one of these topics that we're seeing right now? We'd love to have them in the YouTube live chat. Do you serious games?
Do we hate?
Do we hate fun? Maze,
think...
if you want to get on the panel, you'd be welcome.
Yeah.
I've sent you a chat. So I think maybe what we do is we start answering some questions. Anyone on the panel want to kind of take us through what you're seeing or some bundles maybe you're noticing in the questions before we dive into one of the topics?
I actually pitched a talk which was about pretty much the question is, what's wrong with gamification? Because Maze has sort of drilled down really into some of these big issues about
Yeah, let's do what is gamification.
Yeah,
Go for it.
There's a very narrow definition where gamification means we've learnt basically the logic of poker machines, that keeping people a little bit interested and giving them miniature rewards will keep them addicted to doing something over and over again. And that's become the definition of how to train behavior, which has kind of completely minimized all the things that a game can be and all the ways that games can change behavior in much more varied ways. And that makes it impossible to talk about things, which comes back to definitions and stuff, because you now, when you talk about, oh, let's add games to things, they go, oh, do you mean gamification? Well, not the way it's normally defined.
Yeah, Phaedra Bonadiris, who is IBM's head of serious games, has got a fantastic term that she uses, which is chocolate-coated broccoli. And the idea behind a lot of these gamification efforts where you put points on stuff is you take something that's fundamentally unpalatable and you dip it in chocolate and yay, it's a game now. The reality is that it just tastes worse. You may as well just eat broccoli or just eat chocolate. And so I think that if you're looking from an artistic point of view at serious gaming and thinking really skeptically about this whole gamification thing that's going on in the corporate space, then you're on the right track. Gamification, as opposed to serious gaming, is, I think, garbage. There's a lot of good use for game design concepts and skills in the corporate environment, but sticking points and achievements on things is not one of them.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that in this world of this battle mode, like this idea of games as things that are competitive and that you have to win things and get rewarded for battling and overcoming, this is a problem rife within the sort of game industry, especially video game industry as a whole. But there are some great alternatives that are popping up, the feminist approach to game design, the sort of tend and befriend model, the games that are about collaborative working together, where you're rewarded for collaborating, you're rewarded for coming up with ideas as a team. These rewards are then intrinsically related to cooperation. And so I think that the gamification is not necessarily a huge problem, but whether your approach to the gamification is about sort of either battling and winning or sort of working together makes a big difference in that regard.
We've got a lot of questions coming in, which is great.
Just to bounce off that, though, one thing I found in some of my work is that player expectations, as in people's expectations of what a game is, affects some of those goals. So I've worked on one of the games it's in development right now as a cooperative game, and being cooperative, players are working together towards the end goal. And because we've been targeting largely people that don't normally play board games, it's been aimed at a more general public audience. There's been this, and it's a board game, we should clarify. The perception has been, like, a lot of people are going, well, how do I win? Like, if we're all working together, what's the point? And it's been interesting to kind of observe that sometimes just that in itself is a sticking point for people. Like the idea that it's not competitive in the sense that I'm trying to beat you, like it's and so that's made me rethink even sometimes. And for an adjacent game to it, so we're releasing 2 games with similar goals but different target audiences. For the second game, I've changed my tact, and it is competitive, purely because it's like I didn't want that extra barrier in the way to get to the main message that one was trying to tackle. But it was one of those things that I was really surprised that the number of people were just like stunned by this concept of cooperation and working together. So yeah.
We see it. I do a fair bit of work in the team building world, and a big thing that we have to do is that, like, competition is inherently part of the game, but the thing that gets the best results, the thing that has people having a really good time, which is usually an emotional reaction to a game, is what you want to sort of instill in someone coming away from it to inspire behavioral change, is when the game is developed in such a way that to achieve their goal, they have to work together. And when they figure that out, when it's like, oh, this strategy isn't working, this strategy of me taking over is not working, we as the host might go, well, talk, communicate, and see what happens. And when they do and take a step back, everyone goes, hey, we did it. And we actually communicated with each other, and that felt really good. And it's like, so yeah, collaborative games are not about manipulating anyone to not necessarily win or battle, but it's just like, this feels good. Like, and we're going to show you that it feels good.
Oh, totally. And I've seen that happen as well in the plays as well. And when you get people on board who can, get over that initial hurdle, it can work wonderful. But sometimes it's just that initial thing of like, oh, but I want to win. Like, that's why I play games, is to win. Like, that is the whole sole reason. And for some people, they just can't get past that, thing. Anyway, it's just an observation, really. But, yeah.
If I could maybe jump in there, because we have this amazing map that's evolving here as the panelists are just beavering away, kind of connecting the dots, and then we can explore different parts of that. But in this question of what is a serious game, or I saw a question here is, do serious games have to be serious in terms of tone? I think that's a big no. But it might be worthwhile just to start to name some of the, like a taxonomy of different ways that games are seen to go beyond entertainment. Maybe if some of the panelists can point out what are some of the categories or different ways in which games are used in a serious way.
I mean, I'd like. Oh, you go, Nick.
Okay. One of the places that I operate in is the simulation space, and people who do simulation often get offended by the term game, which is quite interesting in itself. But if you look at, there's an absolute extreme of seriousness, which I think is what the army does. So if you're in an army exercise and you take your laser gun that can't actually hurt anyone and you point it at a friendly and you pull the trigger, they will court-martial you for killing a friendly soldier, and you will be thrown out of the army for that. That is the level of seriousness that the army has for all of these things. Then you go into hospitals and you start working with them in terms of how can you think a bit more flexibly. And they're not fundamentally opposed to concepts from gaming, but they don't want to believe that they're playing games with people's lives. And so that's one extreme. And then one of the games that I nominated in terms of games that I want to talk about their serious implications is Moving Out, which is a fundamentally ridiculous game where you're picking up furniture and loading it into a truck and hilarious things go wrong all the time. And it's a fantastic opportunity for people who have got some anxiety and perfectionism to get over that a little bit. It's a fantastic opportunity to get people feeling confident about their ability to talk to each other and come up with plans, but not have them be overly rigid. And it's got some nice inclusion stuff in it in terms of you can decide that your avatar is in a wheelchair, and it's very rare to have that opportunity for representation for people in wheelchairs, I think. Probably one of the best funding decisions that Film Victoria has ever made. I'll let other people go now.
Yeah, and I'm conscious, Eris, you've got the example, maybe you can talk about in more detail of the game that you've been working on. I'll leave it up to you if you want to be very specific about who you're working with. Could you put that in a context of what sort of category or what purpose it's serving as a serious game or a game beyond entertainment?
So who was that to?
Oh, to Eris?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So a couple of the games I'm working on right now are with the Salvation Army's international development team, and so their primary function as a team is to work with partner countries and partner zones around the world, where they will supply funds and personnel where needed to help with communities that are seeking change. One thing I learned in the process was that I think almost all, if not all, of the projects they run are initiated by people in the communities they work in. So they're not outsiders coming in and just saying, we're going to do a thing for you and accept it, or, whatever. It's usually where they've built relationships, they've got connections. People then will say, we need X, Y, Z, and then they'll try and work out how to make that happen. Obviously, there are a whole lot of checks and balances around how that works, and making sure that there's a lot of auditing and all that kind of stuff, so that resources are being used well, and also just like helping the communities understand that maybe some of the objectives they solve can be solved in different ways than maybe they're thinking of. So with the game, but in saying all that, this is what I've just learned from working with the team. Our audience is for people in an Australian context or a kind of a Western context. To kind of the tangent I've taken with it is to say, if you're playing the game, we've set the game up in a village, and the main game's called It Takes a Village. And the premise of it is that you are working together you represent different households in the village, and you are working together to try and just survive. That's it. And it's very hard to survive. In fact, most times you don't survive. It's a hard game. But if you work together, and people do collaborate and share resources and try and formulate, how do we actually help each other, then it's possible to survive. And so the objective of the game has actually been more about an emotional response than an intellectual or like educational one based on facts and figures. And it's more to say to people, hey, what does it feel like to be just like really poor all the time, like just to have no opportunity to get ahead at all, or to have natural disasters come in and just eradicate anything that you've tried to set up as a buffer to kind of help get by. And so hopefully the goal is to get people to kind of feel something, I suppose, is what it is. And so that's the tact that I took with that one. And it's been really interesting to see how that's progressed and how people have responded to it. But yeah.
So that sounds like a similar in a sense to what Nick was saying, where it's a bit of simulation, but it's still gameful.
Yeah.
Game-like, and it has a learning element, it has a bit of a training element, it has a bit of an emotional element, it has a bit of a problem-solving element. And I think that's probably, that for me is as a collaboration facilitator, one of the most interesting sort of clusters. But I know that there's some other possibilities. So I'm actually curious, James, if you could give an example of maybe the one you worked on with Goma and try to put it within this taxonomy or say something.
Well, the thing that we'd done with Goma was, it was called the Great Goma Heist. And just the briefest summary in the world was, we got a group of people, we split them into two categories, detectives and thieves. The thieves had to go into an art gallery and subtly or secretly draw, like replicate, forge some of the artworks, and they just simply had to draw a simple drawing in a notebook. But if they were caught by the detectives, then they were arrested, and then they defected over into the teams. So it was a sort of a win-lose mechanic where if you got busted by a detective, you became a detective. And if you're a detective, it's just flown away from me at the moment, but there was a mechanic you could have to become a thief. I think it was, you could retire as a detective and become a thief if you wanted. And then of course you're incentivized when you're on the team that you're working for to sort of work together and be the winning team for the game. And a small prize would be given to the winning team. In the sense of collaboration and sort of working within, like, this was very much a space activation type game. And it was about sort of getting people into a space and engaging with that space in a meaningful way, which is something that is constantly, we're sort of redesigning that process in the game. Because, I don't know, people listening who have played games, that there's a big difference between the intent to win the game and then actually engaging with something in a meaningful way.
When you say space activation, that's something that your client was asking for. Can you say more about what the value is for them, and also maybe what the value was for the players beyond just the fun?
Yeah, so for the client, and this is like very much buzzword territory, space activation just meant clicking the little buzzer saying, this is how many people came through our door today. Yeah, they just want more people in the space, and they want to be able to tell people we have had more people come into the space. So the activation was very much just, the more people are here, the happier everyone is. For the players, the value for them was, it was an emergent property because a lot of them weren't, it was a brand new type of game. When they came on board, they weren't too sure what they were doing. It was sort of working together. So at the start, you're a thief working on your own. And then what emerged out of the gameplay was this feeling of like, you're a thief too? Okay, let's try and trick this detective, because I think there's a detective over here. Let's create plans and strategies. And then they would go to where the master thief was, and the master thief would say, okay, I need people to do this. And so they would gradually be brought into this social sphere where by the end of the game, they had, hey, I'm part of a team, I'm part of a group, and communication between people who otherwise might have had a bit of social anxiety was free flowing and very easy. So our game ended up giving permission for people to just have social interactions that otherwise they might not have had.
Cool. I want to stay in this space a little longer because I feel like we're getting this really rich picture of all the different outcomes that serious games can provide beyond a badge that temporarily makes you feel better about answering all your emails today. And I feel like there's another category here, which is games that aren't necessarily kind of customized for a specific group or organization or cohort or space, but they go through similar mass market channels as any game. And just by playing them, you get some sort of experience or, empathic reaction or some new story that opens up and changes your mind. And I maybe throw it to Steve if you've got an example of that, Steve, or if you want to also open up that space around, isn't that every game that does that?
Yeah, I mean, Eris has touched on it, and Nick has touched on it with moving out, is that there is a lot of things going on in every game that's out there about the models they present and how they simulate things, because every game has, unless it's absolutely abstract, you're simulating some sort of aspect. Something I always like to remember is that when they originally the queen didn't really exist in chess, and when it was introduced, there was actually a lot of social uprising and people upset as the SJWs were taking over chess, basically. And that was in the 16th century, and you think of chess as being extremely abstract, but it has messages in it about which things matter and which things don't. The royals are more important than the common men and things like that. We use the language of chess to talk about the value of people, whether they're just a pawn in the game and things like that. So every game is communicating meaning, and this is why we have this problem of what makes something serious, because everything can be viewed with the lens of what is the agenda, what is being taught here. And I've used games that you would not consider to be serious to introduce concepts to people, and teach them about, for example, Norse mythology using the game Yggdrasil, because it has a really good understanding of what the Norse mythology is and how it operates. And it's a really good way to go, well, instead of reading this book or watching this TV show or something, let's sit down for an hour and you can actually play the Norse mythology and pick a god, and by the end of it, you'll know who all the characters are and what happened and all that kind of thing. So anything that has any game is giving a sort of a message and a teaching opportunity, and I would argue greater teaching in many cases than passive media, because of the involvement, and also because people don't think they're learning. You don't want to get into chocolate-coated broccoli, but as we said with moving out and with Monopoly, it's the things you don't realize you're learning, and the value systems that sort of creep in those things that can leave a really lasting impact.
Can I just jump in and respond to that quickly? Because one thing, this is a personal story for me. A few years ago, I was facing the prospect of bankruptcy. It didn't end up happening, but it was very close to happening. And I remember going through that process and working with a financial counselor and stuff. It was really tough. And one of the things that I unpacked was that I had this ingrained feeling that bankruptcy was inherently terrible and wrong, and it very much spoke to my character and all this kind of stuff. And I realized that part of that stemmed from the fact that I grew up playing Monopoly, where bankruptcy is the losing condition. That's how you lose the game, is by having money and be bankrupt. And it was a small epiphany, but it was one that really stuck with me about how this kind of assumption had grown up as a kid just because of the words that were used and the way it was handled in that game. And so I think there definitely is impact with even the choices we make as designers with what we call things, and the real world, analogies that we will put to these abstract elements. And it's something that I really try and consider heavily now, the more and try and get better at considering is the implications of, what I'm doing and when I'm making stuff. So, yeah.
They made a version of Monopoly about a couple of years ago, which was basically a confetti gun sort of filled with paper money.
Oh, yeah.
You fired it into
the worst.
Yeah, and the aim of the game was to grab as much money as you possibly could. And it just, that sense of, the reason kids like Monopoly is that parents have money and they don't, and they want to pretend. But it does lead to this thing of, I want to grab all the money. And it's a hell of a thing when you realize that it's this universal lesson that every kid is being given, basically, to grab all the money.
Well,
so I've got James and Nick both waiting to make a contribution. Yeah. Maybe James, you go, and then I'll go to Nick.
All right. Yeah, I just wanted to share a quick story about how a game can be very fun and presented as something silly, and that the actual thing that turned it into a serious thing was the reflection that happened afterwards. So this happened in I do immersive theater and in the drama world, and come from sort of like a drama training background. And we would run this game with groups of kids, teenagers and young adults. And it was a very simple game. You just break up into groups of 4, 20 people, maybe into groups of 4. And one person in that group is the leader, and they just get to be the leader. And the other 3 are there, do what the leader says. And we play this game for 10 minutes. And we would play an iteration of the game, and the leader would say, go and do this, or it would be all very fun and very simple. And then a turning point would happen where and this over iteration and iteration, this would often happen. You would play the game and you would swap leaders around, and they would do things like, give me a massage, or, they would order their minion to sort of try and do something silly. Someone would have the idea of go and interact with the other groups. And this would just emerge as a result of the leaders would get bored ordering around their minions, and they would see the other groups and think, hey, let's go and interact with the other groups. And the game was never, as the game facilitator, you're never supposed to like direct that. But this is a part of like, this is an emergent property. So if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. It usually does. And then a tribalism emerges out of that game, and the groups start to go, let's screw with the other groups. Let's play pranks on the other groups. So it was very, very rarely a cooperative approach. And it was all done in fun. And then at the end, we reflected on it. And it was in those reflections that people went, oh, wow. And it's like, yeah, you just naturally formed. The instruction was, you're the leader and you have some people who will do your bidding. And out of that sort of just general, very simplified rule, these mechanics of like tribalism and fighting with other groups would come out. And that's when people would really reflect and be like, oh, isn't that interesting? Oh, yeah, well, I can see how that happens in the world and see where this is. And they got actually a lived-in experience of being an oppressor without even meaning to, by accident. And it's like, that's how simple. This was in a workshop called Theater of the Oppressed. It's like, this is an example of how someone can become an oppressor without even realizing it. And these light bulb moments would happen quite often in this game, because they were like, wow, we were just having fun. And yeah, we did go into this combat mode. So I would say that's how games can become serious. Even when they come from a place of play and fun. It's the reflection and what that means as the gamers made choices that can be really impactful.
Thanks, James. So I think I'm going to head back to Nick, who's been our conceptual cartographer. I have a feeling maybe he's going to direct our attention back to the map. Is that what you're thinking?
I mean, the thing that got me excited was questions about where do we draw the line between serious work and playful fun, and that sort of question. And it reminded me of the night when I got serious about serious games. So I went to a simulation conference and I got talking to Cameron Knott, and he was really, really interested in ways in which games create a safe space psychologically. Moving out is an easy example of that sort of thing. Things go wrong when you're playing moving out all the time. But it's okay that things go wrong, because that's the structure of the game, is that it's built around things going hilariously wrong. And he talked to me. He told me a story about people. People die when doctors make mistakes. People die when doctors make mistakes in simulation exercises. People have been killed in training. And so finding ways to make it safe to explore and have fun with these literal life and death things has been a really interesting challenge. I'm restricted in what I can talk about in terms of the specifics there, because Steve Costa's journal article, there's an NDA around that at the moment. But it's really powerful, that opportunity to find ways to make it safe to learn for people who are doing this really dangerous work. And there was a related question: is there a perfect balance of serious and silly? Yes, but it's very context specific. Yeah, and so you've got to understand where you're at. And I'll shut up in a moment, but I wanted to quickly address the question that got raised about Assassin's Creed and documentaries and stuff. I think that tacking on a documentary to your game about murder doesn't really make it a serious game. I think that there is a difference there, and different people will judge where the line is differently, and that's fine. But I don't regard Assassin's Creed as a serious game, even though there's a documentary extra on the DVD.
So thanks, Nick. I was hoping maybe, I think, am I right that it was you that's done the most to kind of bundle and label this? Like, you know where all the different parts of the map are?
Yeah, so yeah, I should take you through the map. So we've got a marketing section.
If you could use your, I'm going to spotlight myself, and I'm going to try to drive the group around it. So if you could spotlight the section you want me to zoom in on with your arrow.
Yeah, so we have a marketing set of questions in terms of, are there different types of serious games? I'm not sure that there's a strongly developed taxonomy there or not. Who are they targeted towards? Does the label push people away from engagement? What alternative terms could you use? Does the term serious hold you back? Is it a derogatory term? Is it related to the games industry as documentaries are to film? I think there is a relationship like that. I don't know, should we talk about the marketing stuff for a bit, or would you like to visit a different part of the map?
Maybe, do you think that's the next best place to go, Nick, or should we?
I think it's an important topic.
Maybe just without going into detail, show us at a high level the different zones.
Okay. So we have that marketing zone. We had some ethical questions in terms of is gamification evil, and there were some other things as well. Questions about implementation of serious games, building in reward systems for behaviors and that sort of thing. And those are the things that I labeled. And then you've got questions about what does it mean to be serious.
Right, and that's a lot of what we have been talking about. Okay, well, marketing seems like the next biggest piece. Tell us in the YouTube chat if there's somewhere you'd rather be going next. Just shout out for your preferred zone. But yeah, we want to take us into some of these topics in the marketing zone, Nick, and then we'll open it back up to the panel.
Sure. So quickly addressing that, does the term serious hold you back? I personally wouldn't have clients without the term serious, because the doctors and the armies and the banks, they don't want to have conversations that aren't serious. I think that there's a lot of valid alternatives, and yeah, the initial vision for hybrid simulations was to be the discovery channel of gaming, and I sort of discovered in the process of trying to do that I'm more of an investigative journalist than I am a documentary maker, and there's a difference there. And if you're a documentary maker and you'd like to work with an investigative journalist, let me know.
Anyone else want to lean into one of these questions? Maybe, let's see.
Yeah, I mean, I'd just like to speak to the differences between talking to a client and talking to the player. Like, as the game's provider, you're always in the middle of the client and the player, and that you usually have a different language. Like, as a team builder, the way I talk to the person who wants their team built, I don't talk that way to the player, because we talk about the players as like, these are things we want to change in the players. And I don't go to everyone, well, everyone, I'm going to change you to be a better employee today. So it's a language-based thing. But in terms of marketing, games, what I would say is that people want behavioral change. They are going to employ a serious game, or they're going to gamify something because they want to change the behavior of a human being. And usually for the betterment of either the company or for the betterment of the human being themselves. And so the serious gaming is about saying, look, games are one of the best ways at inspiring behavioral change, because they give you an area where you can give permission to someone to do something they wouldn't normally do, and you give them permission to take risks in a way in which the stakes are lower than their real world environment. So if you give someone permission in a gamified situation to be like, okay, now you are the outspoken person who just always yells, and you give permission to someone to do that in a safe space, then they get to live in that experience and go, oh, this is what it feels like to be this person who otherwise I would never be comfortable being. So games can inspire behavioral change, and that's what a serious game does. But it does ask a question, I think, of like, well, if games are really good at inspiring behavioral change, then isn't that going to happen with non-serious games? Isn't that potentially going to happen with Call of Duty or combat games? It's not really looked at a whole lot, but I think it's an interesting avenue.
Yeah, that resonates for me as a collaboration facilitator working with government organizations, even industry and academia. It starts with the outcome always, even if you're designing a collective problem-solving workshop. So you're trying to get this group to agree on a new vision or a new roadmap, and you design a sequence of activities and experiences that you might change on the fly, but you're taking those people through that. So by the end of whatever time is available, they've gotten somewhere new. They have new possibilities in front of them. They have a higher level of agreement, and we're more likely to get a positive outcome as a result. And so I'm interested in that. And often facilitators refer to their activities as games. So there's a really interesting process there. Even if it's just something like putting some sticky notes on the board, facilitators I know might refer to what we're doing on Miro as a kind of game. So a couple threads coming up, and I'm curious if someone's popping to just take this further. But is behavior change, or the individual humans have behavior A now, and we want behaviors B, C, and D later? Is it all always boil down to behavior change, or is there another way of kind of looking at it?
I think that's certainly, if we are looking for a definition, the intent and engagement with behavioral change is probably a key marker of what makes something serious. And, with Nick and Eris's work, it's really something that is measured and desired from the very start of the process, as opposed to the end where we go, okay, well, what are people learning from this? Now, obviously that can change. Monopoly started as a game intended to teach something to people, and now has been severed from that and teaches a lot of things accidentally. But I think that's probably at best the kind of definition as we can get, maybe, is that intent and level of engagement with changing people's minds and attitudes, and that kind of that issue is probably where we can draw a line and go, these things are more like that and these things are less like that. Does that sound right to our other panelists?
I'd split some hairs. I'd talk about learning not necessarily always being behavior change. Sometimes you're trying to reinforce an existing good behavior. But generally speaking, I think learning is the key thing, and usually you'll measure that in terms of a behavior change.
Yeah, I guess there becomes some implicit assumptions in there, doesn't it? Of well, we want our employees to know more, and we want them to have a good time, and we want them to work with each other. And it's well, why do you want that? What is the implicit assumption behind knowing more, working together, and sort of having a good time? The implicit assumption is that, I guess, they will give more of themselves over. Hopefully, a part of it is that they, for the more benevolent game people who want to employ these things, it's that our employees who feel good and have a good time, or the people playing our games that enjoy it, they're going to interact with us more. They're going to be there. They're going to stay on the job, or they're going to come back, or they're going to give us maybe some of their money. Yeah, definitely increase engagement.
Maybe let's poke into this ethics bit a little bit, which is, if chocolate on the broccoli gamification is evil, and other games which use behavior change and nudge and supporting people to move towards a new way of being, which is the one we wanted them to have all along. Where do you sort of draw those boundaries, or what are some of the gray areas or moral dilemmas you might face in this process?
I think the concept of informed consent becomes a little bit tricky here, because a lot of game mechanics are invisible, and that's something that was talked about a lot, particularly last year and at Freeplay. There was a big thread on Twitter about game mechanics being invisible. One classic example is the fighting, your power in a fighting game, your health is a bar, and we think of it as being each section being equally the same, but the last little bit is actually longer than it appears, so that you feel like you can survive at the last little second. And that is kind of misinformation, but it suits the emotion of the situation. When you start applying that to things that can really change behavior, you have that question of, well, how much should we let people in on what we're actually doing to them? And that is I don't think there's any easy answers there. But I think it's something that game design hits, fairly quickly. There's Brenda Romero famously made a game about moving basically people across a train network, and you play it, and then you can reveal the table is actually moving people from Jewish ghettos to execution camps and concentration camps. And the idea is sort of like, it's the same logistic problem. We've just given you more information about the start and the end. And part of the way that she would run that is with limited information and then a reveal. And that only works if you have, a limited amount of consent to a sort of opt out. And we talked about, the army games, you can't just go, oh, this is too much for me in an army game. You can't leave that. So that's quite intense. Jane Elliott is back in the news at the moment. And Jane Elliott is someone who back in the 80s and 90s developed a program to teach people about racism, where she divides a group of people up into the blue eyes and the other color eyes. And the blue eyes she treats the way the system treats people of color. And she deliberately makes it impossible for you to leave that scenario, even if it starts overwhelming you, because people of color cannot take off their skin color. So she doesn't let you get out when you get overwhelmed. And that is a extreme experience. So that's just a couple of examples of how gaming and these serious things, like we run right head first into how much informed consent can you give if you're going to get the effects that you want. And this is a huge psychological huge issue in psychological literature, I presume, on this sort of thing.
And look, this sort of thing comes up in immersive theater a lot as well, of like, how far can we go with an audience, and how much do we tell them prior? And the people I've been talking to and the stuff I've heard, at least in escape rooms and immersive theater territory, the solution has twofold. It's a benefit. Like the solution is that you tell people. And what that does is it doesn't spoil anything. You can't be too worried about spoiling something, especially if the spoil is like, you're going to give someone a lived in experience of trauma. And then it's like, I wanted them to be surprised into the trauma. It's like, no, you tell them straight up, hey, look, trigger warning, this is going to be talking about X, Y, and Z. If you're okay with that, then come on in. Or there may be some light with your permission physical interaction. And then what that does, it actually helps you market your product in a fairer way and with more intrigue, because the people who are going to go, okay, yeah, they go, all right, okay, well, this is going to get real. I'm going to let that happen. And so when it does happen, they go, this is the thing I was told about. And they're not being like, oh God, no, I'm not like ready for this. So it's just about not wanting to shock people, and more wanting to let people choose to be transformed by your experience. And you can do that by just saying, hey, this is R-rated. And they go, R-rated, you say, I'm in.
And I think that's also a good way of looking at it, is that we can reveal thematic, triggers or issues or problems without necessarily giving away every single story point or a part that's there. And I know with the It Takes a Village game, if I'm teaching a new group and I'm not really sure about their backgrounds or where they're from, I'll often try to say, hey, this is a game about survival and you're trying to survive and it's going to be tough and you're going to be facing challenges. And, I'm not going to tell you what every challenge is, but, you're going to have to work together and do all that kind of stuff. So that way they at least know, okay, this isn't going to be a really super easy experience. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's interesting reflecting on the one hand in terms of our professional stuff and the way that consent is extremely important, and aftercare and all of those sorts of things. But at the same time, if you're not necessarily preparing a professional product for a professional audience, I can think about This Is the Police, which is really interesting to analyze as a serious game. If you can play This Is the Police without being offended, then you have no morals at all. But it makes a really, really interesting and educational statement about policing and why police do things in the community and crime. So thanks Ted Denola for pointing out about serious games about managing police departments in the chat. And it can teach the wrong lesson, and that's one of the really powerful differentiators between explicit education and art. So I can justify This Is the Police as an artistic statement in terms of presenting a vision about the world, quite a dark vision, but I wouldn't. I would be very, very reluctant to put it in front of a group of police officers and ask them to learn something from it.
Does that tie into the other cluster of questions going back to marketing and getting people excited about them and trying to get people to play these things, because people often see them as documentaries or boring or art house? Certainly I've had trouble getting some of my favorite games that are about serious subjects onto the table because people are like, I don't want to simulate the slave trade in the 19th century America. I want to simulate robots in the future because that's not what I want to think about.
And I think half the people on this panel have copies of Holding On, and we never get to play it because people say, so it's a game about choosing whether you want to get information from the guy or keep him alive. So is there like
we move up?
James was saying some people really want to buy in on that. What do we have for thoughts for people who go, well, no, hang on, I don't want to do that? James, do you encounter that kind of thing about self-selecting out? Are you losing some of your audience?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I actually don't know the answer to that. I think if, let's just say you in immersive theater, for example, or an escape room where someone's like, no, that's going to trigger me, then you just have to respect that. But I do get that there could be, there could be an important lesson there. My answer to that question is, I don't know. That would be a great thing to delve into more in.
So I'm conscious that I think we're actually at the end of our time. So do we want to do a quick bit on where we think the industry could be going or what the new possibilities are, people who may want to design into this space? So I'm zoomed in on this section in the top left about convincing clients. Do they attract more funding, that sort of thing? But kind of combine that with any thoughts you think about the possibilities that are yet to be explored in this space.
Do you mind if I jump in there? One thing that I found ironic about my little freelance career of making games is that I've made more money with my serious game work and for clients where the games aren't released in a retail sense, they're usually educational, than I have with any of my retail products or working with standard publishers. Now, there's heaps of reasons for that, obviously, but one thing I've discovered in that process, which the more I started doing it, the more these companies or charities or organizations, most of the people I've worked with the charities, have come out of the woodwork going, oh, we now see games as potentially a way that we can communicate something, or even if it starts off with a less, I guess, positive goal, and it's more just like, oh, we want to have a product that we can just get our name out there so people know we exist. Oh, let's make a game. And it's like, then I can help work with them and go, well, okay, well, let's give this game a purpose. Like, what's the message that we want to convey, and go from there. And so I feel like for me, it's the eye opener of the last 3 or 4 years has really been that I think there's a really, I'm going to say, a large niche for this kind of stuff that isn't visible from a retail kind of angle. So people don't really know it's there. But if you're someone who, like, if you're connected to that charity or connected to that issue or organization who works in that issue, then there's a space for these things to exist and to have purpose, but it's not based on retail metrics. And that's been something of a learning for me.
Yeah. Would love to hear more about that from anyone else on the panel, your experiences in that niche.
Yeah. I've been doing a lot of content writing recently, just during COVID. And so with that has come some research articles. This is for a team building company I do some contract work for. And man, the stats are when people feel welcome, when they feel engaged, when they feel heard and respected, they're happier and they will engage more with whatever it is that is providing that experience for them. So, and I, you know, from my perspective, there seems to be a push to move away from this whole like alpha male leader of a team, you know, this like the only way to get ahead is just to like kill everyone. Look, that works for a small selection, a very, very, very tiny selection of people. But for the most part, people want to feel included. Leaders of teams, ones that are effective, are ones that work as a group and work for their group. And so, like, you know, I mentioned the feminist approach to game design before and sort of redirecting people to more collaborative modes. And the behavioral change thing. So I would say in this new sort of like in this world of trying to sell your games and get clients and whatnot, you want to say, look, the best way for your employees to feel loved and cared for, and the best way to get them to, you know, be more productive, let's say, or your business is about making money, the best way to make some more money is for people to feel welcomed and to feel like they have some authority and feel confident in making decisions. And games that are about collaborating and working together, designing games that are going to have those as the outcomes, are going to inspire that behavior in people. So it can be simple if you get the conversation with the client where they say, what will a game do for us? It's like, well, the game is going to let the people that you want to play it feel empowered and feel a part of a team. And that's going to help them trust and respect you or the organization. And that's what the game is going to do. It's going to inspire positive change rather than it's going to like let the 1% of vicious rulers rise to the top. We know that doesn't work anymore. This is about collaborative space. So that's my 2 cents anyway.
Yeah, I think that there's a very real difference between having a client and working for a client and working for yourself, producing something for the mass market. Working for clients is kind of reassuring. You get much faster feedback in terms of whether you're on the track that they want or not, and you get paid, you know, by the hour or by the day or whatever your arrangement is. Whereas if you're developing for the mass market, then someone's got to take a risk and invest however much it is, and if it's a computer game, then it's going to be a non-trivial amount of time and therefore money. And so I'm finding, you know, games for me is a sideline. You know, it's a thing that it's really nice to be able to offer, but if I take a hard look at the numbers in terms of the money that I could have made doing call center integration as opposed to games, I've cost myself about $250,000. And so, but I think that it's a market worth understanding, and the conversations you get to have, the things you get to learn about, it's fantastic. And so I do it because it humanizes me, not because it makes money.
Can I just throw that sort of open then? If a lot of people, you know, come to Freeplay, they are game designers looking to figure out where they should be putting their skills. It'd be interesting to hear from people how they got their clients. Like, here I am, I'm a game designer. How do I find a client who wants me to make serious games? Like, if it's only just your personal story. So for me, I haven't done that. I've just made games that are personal to me and put them out on itch and things like that, and got a little bit of a response. But I'd love to hear how you guys found those clients, and if you have any advice for people who, you know, have game skills to go out and look for those kind of things.
So for my story, it started obviously. So my day job was with the Salvation Army, and I was working on my first card game, my very first ever card game. And I was playtesting it at work just at lunchtime with some friends, and a new person had started, and they were working in our social justice team at the time. And they were like, oh, maybe we could do a game that, you know, shares some of our goals. And so then that led to a conversation, and we had it then set up as an official project in my work and all that kind of stuff to make a game for that. And that was my first one. That was just chocolate. Because I did that, and that became a real, you know, boxed product, it then led that whenever opportunities arose to talk about it or pitch it or whatever, I was able to say, here's something I've done. So it's a bit of proof of experience. And that meant that we had in one of the Australian board game Facebook groups called Tabletop Games of Australia, a few years ago, someone was a customer, a client, and they had heard about the group and they wanted a designer for an educational game for schools. And so a few of us put in, submissions, and I managed to get to the opportunity to work with them. And that was a really compressed, 2-month project working on it. I actually don't even know if it ever got released beyond a pilot, because once they finished my hours, they never communicated with me again. So that was just the way it worked. They paid me and everything. It was all fine, but it was just one of those situations. But because I had the other experience, it led to that. And then another project that's been going on for the last 2 years, and is in a bit of a weird situation because of the type of organisation we are in charity. But I've been working with an organisation in Broome on mental health recovery. And they primarily work with people who are in the welfare system or other adjacent kind of services. And so they had a game that they had developed already as part of a training tool to help educate both their staff and their clients on the process that they use. And somehow they realized that people must make games for a living. And so they put a bit of they searched and they found this person in Germany that makes board games. It just so happened that this person in Germany knew about me through Instagram, and so said, hey, this person's in Australia, you're in Australia, how about you talk? And so then I started working with them, and that's been going on for the last 18 months, but it's in a bit of a weird space because it's just life is strange. And charities and funding changes and all this kind of stuff, and so now it's a bit of a limbo. But the point was that for me, it's been very much a stepping stone of like one project has given me the confidence and experience to then talk more confidently when other opportunities arise. And I've been fortunate, obviously, that very first one happened in a situation where it was with my normal employer. So there was kind of a safety of space and money, like I wasn't risking a lot of personal money or anything like that to make it happen. But it definitely has been a kind of a join the dot kind of scenario for me. But it does challenge me with everything I do. And like I said, I'm now looking at, even with the retail games that I work on, how do we bring more educational, how do we inspire change in what we do? And so like, even when I'm working on kids card games and stuff, I think about, what is this teaching them, both from a thematic point of view, but practically, like, does it help them count better or do addition or like do other things? And, and I consider that pretty serious. So, yeah.
James and Nick have, maybe one of you have more to say on this subject.
James?
Yeah. So my experience has just been, I just talk to my friends about it. It's a bit of a, I don't know, it's not a great story, but it's just, I love this sort of thing. And I was part of some theater circles. I did theater and then met theater people. And I guess a lot of the conversations that come around is, maybe I'd bring it down to this one key difference is when you're talking to someone and they say, what do you do? And you either tell them what you enjoy doing or what pays the bills. And my recommendation for anyone out there is, if someone says, hey, what do you do? Then don't say, I work at Coles, or like, I'm a packer down in the back room. You just say, well, I love designing games. I love playing card games. And you just say, I love doing this as a response to their question of what do you do? And if they push you for the money, it's like, I don't do that. That just earns me money. Just talk about what you love doing. It's a bit cheesy, but what ends up happening is you do this 100 times and someone will be like, hey, well, I love doing this too. Do you want to try and do something together? And you just say yes to these opportunities. You put the work in. And that's how I've sort of gotten along and gotten to where I am, which is, a sole trader running my own little immersive experience business. I have a whole bunch of people who I've just sort of spoken to about this stuff, and they make stuff, and it's grown from there. So it's not a very romantic tale, but that's my approach.
Yeah, I think that's great advice about answering the question of who you are. I've spent weeks thinking about how to do 10 seconds of presenting myself as a really attractive person that people want to work with on the things that I want to work with them about. And that's worth the effort. And yeah, show up to stuff. I've been showing up to stuff for 5 years, and And the money I've made out of that has almost covered the cost of going to all of those events and paying for tickets and flights and all the rest of it. But it is, I mean, there's a, yeah, I mean, there's I'm looking at the chat and seeing the word ladder climbery, and you kind of do, right? There's like, and the nice thing about dealing with corporate clients is they don't mind if you're overtly sort of trying to get the best value that they can, because they're all doing it too. And it's very much about finding the environment that's right for you. You know, I turn out to be a person who wears collared shirts at home, actually sincerely cares about balance sheets, is you know, I am passionate about some of the most boring shit in the universe. And there are people who need that done, and so that works for me. But yeah, you know, show up to things, be very openly and who you are, and engage with people, and you'll eventually, you know, now that I've been doing this for 5 years, I think I might know how to get started.
Yeah, I'll just reflect that I've seen in trying to, so I work in these facilitation gigs, and I've had to try to sneak it in because people buy categories they're familiar with, and they don't buy categories they've never bought before. And generally they need to know that it's worked somewhere else. So often you're pointing at something else. So it's been done, well, the Salvation Army did this, and here's how it worked. And also what I'll do is I've snuck Space Team into a meeting where I was trying to teach people to collaborate, because it's a 5-minute game. They can play it in 5 minutes and they can go, wow, we really did learn a lot about how we actually wait for our manager to tell us what to do. And because we waited for him to tell us what to do, we actually crashed into an asteroid because the timer ran out, because we weren't taking independent action. And those sorts of experiences can start to build things up, but you still run into this challenge of you may be talking to the innovative, excited person who connects with your personality and with your vision, but they generally, for anything, you know, over a certain threshold of cost, they have to get that approved by someone who's not in the room, who needs to see clearly on paper what is the actual outcome and impact going to be that contributes to their existing strategic goals, which isn't always making more money, you know, if you're working with nonprofits or government. But also, you know, Maze is raising some points in the chat, you know, that sort of ladder climbery thing, and that the folks are there discussing, you know, I think Maze said you want to make sure you're lifting people up as you go. And yeah, this idea I've been talking to Steve a bit about the idea of a scene and about a culture, and that's one of the things I think we're interested in this, is trying to open up the space of serious game design and give some clues about how people find clients. So what does it look like for us to have a sort of solidarity in this specific little niche that we're in right now?
Well, Hailey, can I speak to something that you just said? It reminded me, when you're talking to clients, you know, especially if you're going down this behavioral change path, like I'm going to do, your goal is actually to change the behavior of the person that you're talking to. And so when you are dealing with a client, I found this can be helpful to me, like when talking to employers sometimes, is you're playing your own game. And the game is, how can I be heard? Or how, you know, in terms of like lifting other people up, how can I climb the ladder with, how can all the boats rise type thing? Like that's the game you're playing. And I think if you can approach the situation, your situations in life, okay, what are the rules of this? What is my avatar? And what are the tools I have at my disposal? Then I found that framework as a game designer and as a game player to look at real world interactions in a somewhat gamified way can be quite useful. It's like, okay, well, this person is going to respond to this emotion, you know, or this person is going to wants to see this change. Here, I'm going to provide you with that change. Okay. Oh, hey, what do you want to see? What do you want in the world? And they tell you, and then you can say, well, this is how I can help you achieve that goal. So finding out what the client wants, and then telling them how you can give them that world that they want can go a long way.
Maybe there's an opportunity as well around how we release some of this. So some of these games can become retail, and maybe it's something you want to hold on to the intellectual property and sell In other cases, there's pretty huge libraries out there of workshop-oriented serious games. There's the paying for predictions game that I mentioned before. You can find online if you do the right Googling, and there's download the PDF on how to play it. So I wonder if there's possibilities there as well to spread the tools out, and then what you do is you find the opportunities to get paid to customize that or bring that into a specific circumstance. So I guess, and also we all have this common thing where we're not necessarily designing retail video game immersive experiences, so that our panel is a bit narrow around people who are going in and creating in-person workshops and more tabletop experiences. Just acknowledging that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe for the last bit of time here, we've got about 20 minutes left, we could zoom in on this implementation section. I think there's maybe a way into it. There's this set of questions around reflection. So we have this question from Amy Doherty. Reflection period is also important in virtual reality, as it's helpful to generate aftercare and a time to bridge from our world to ours. Tim Nugent says, how can you build reflection into a game that isn't just let's take a break? So for me as a facilitator, I see games as one sort of part usually of a larger facilitation process where I'm trying to take a group and organization to a new place. How have you built these sorts of things in where it goes a bit beyond the gameful or playful or the immersion and more into that transition back to the default world, let's say?
I think that's I'm imagining that probably in things that people have led as facilitators and things like that there's an awareness of that structure. I'm imagining maybe in some of the things also that Nick does, the things where you come back and reflect at the end and look at lessons, whereas in board games we're not really doing that kind of thing. Aaron Lim in the chat was sort of said, like, maybe we should start thinking about like building these kind of things at least into rituals, if not into actual rules. Like at the end of the football game, everyone shakes hands, and we have a little bit of that where people go GG, but it's very small and very reflexive, and maybe we should actually have a little ritual where we go, is everyone okay? Was I being too mean? What do you think we want? Do we want to play this again? Did we like it? Just trying to figure out if we can actually put either into the rules or into our gamer rituals ways to reflect, and not just, so that's on the social aspects of what just happened and the competition, but also on what do we think about the themes. I remember when Puerto Rico was many years ago. Puerto Rico is a board game where you are basically playing Spanish colonizers and Portuguese colonizers of the island of Puerto Rico, and there are these tiny little brown discs that represent colonists. Someone's just made the point that it doesn't really matter if you play Puerto Rico or not, but it's really good to sit at the end and go, let's just talk about those brown discs for a second and what they represent. And just like add reflection can be a great way to add meaning to something that is out there. So those of you who have experience with facilitation sort of things, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, and bringing it over to places where there aren't facilitators, or it's sort of left in the box.
Yeah, I think it's one of the most difficult challenges is not only, like, let's say you provide a meaningful experience, let's say people watch your show or play your game or or a facilitator by you and have a transformation and they're crying or they're like laughing, and then then take on that next step of how will this actually change who they are and how they operate in the world for good. Immensely difficult. It's bringing to mind people who have done that have found out that they're going to die of cancer, and then they do some crazy new, like, I just realized that my life is completely different, so I'm going to go and change the world. And I think it's very difficult to inspire change. To offer a solution, it would, I think, an opportunity for reflection and for feedback being built into the experience, not just add on, but like they know, like, you at the end of this game there will be a feedback optional, maybe not that already I'm cringing at that, but that it's designed into the experience so people know, okay, after this there's going to be, my input is going to somehow be valuable, is all I can say.
I've wrestled with this a lot, because even though the people who I've worked with have wanted specific outcomes, usually they're not facilitated experiences. They're things that they're going to be, putting into a box and passing on to other people, whether that's through selling or giving away. And so it's really tough to kind of think about, how do we instigate this kind of stuff? And, I guess the way I've kind of coped with it is to sort of hope that the experience that they've had in the game adds to all the other experiences they're having that will lead to a change at some point. So with Just Chocolate, in the game, it's very blunt, but ethically sourced ingredients for making chocolate are worth more points. If you play them, they will always give you a better result long term. It's not nuanced. And the message very much is, if you go to a shop and you can see that, these different products have accreditation and whatever for different auditing processes, and so that we have more faith that they're looking after their people better, then choose them. They're probably a better choice than the ones that we don't know where it's coming from. I don't expect someone to play that game and walk away with that epiphany going, oh, I'm now going to radically change everything I do, even though we have also put it in the reference sheet, in the rule book, saying, hey, this is why this is important, in a paragraph of text with some logos to look for. But what I hope is that it's a stepping stone and contributes to all the other things that we have in our cultural kind of, osmosis, or whatever you want to call it, where we're gathering that stuff, and then eventually it'll lead to an epiphany and to change. But it's definitely a thorny and tricky thing, and I'd love to hear more people's ideas on how to do it better.
It's a big topic. I'm reminded of an exercise that I did at the Austin Hospital, where the exercise was, you are the doctor. Nick is here portraying the husband of your patient. The patient has died. Tell him about it. And we spent 15 minutes doing that exercise, and with me going into shock and being upset about the whole thing. And then we spent an hour debriefing it. Because that was the real point, was to really understand these incredibly important moments that for intensive care professionals happen far more often than you'd want to. Coping with dead patients is an incredibly important and powerful part of that job. Generally speaking, with me, if you stuff up the rules of the game, if you don't understand some aspect of the mechanics or whatever, I'm unlikely to care. If you stuff up the briefing or the debrief or the psychological safety, I'm still upset about an incident in that regard from 2 years ago, because I haven't had a proper conversation with that person about exactly what happened. And it's, these are real people playing your games. And if you've got patients dying, if you're casting people as the guards at Auschwitz, if you've got, any of these high concept, high impact things happening, there's, I'm really, really, really serious about this topic. Ever since I learned that people die in simulation, people have been injected with the wrong things, and people have had post-traumatic stuff brought up in the context of the simulation, had a heart attack and died. So that's an aspect of serious gaming that I really want people to be very serious about, is the psychological safety.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say to that, if you're unsure, then do some research. Like if you think, maybe, I sort of want to introduce this racial awareness, then go and do some research and do your due diligence. In terms of that safety. I think in terms of implementation, letting people know that their feedback and that their input during the debriefing is actually valuable, and is actually going to go toward a larger purpose. For example, in Eris, if this these micro changes in people's perspectives about the world, like we have been hearing for a long time, 1 million people making one tiny different decision that barely impacts them actually does have a huge difference. So I think it's important to let people know their feedback is valuable, that their voice is heard, and that there's a safe space for them to operate in post the game to debrief.
I'll butt back in very briefly and say, have a mental health first aid officer. There is such a thing as a mental health first aid certificate. Have someone on your team who's got that qualification.
Cool. So, Steve, you suggested in our chat maybe we could talk about mistakes where people may learn the wrong lesson.
Yeah.
We've got about 10 minutes left, so I want to do a bit of a checkout. But if we could do a couple quick thoughts on that.
Just, we're talking about that things can go wrong in simulations where people do the wrong thing, but also there are issues where, particularly in some examples of historical, where people have tried to create these simulations and they've ended up teaching people the wrong thing because of the way that the game just doesn't get the psychology right. So there was a very famous game where they were trying to teach people, I think it was in the UK, about how hard it is to be poor. But after a few playthroughs, people sort of went, oh, if I do this, 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 and this, I can beat this game. And they came away with the impression that being poor isn't that hard. Because they learned how to beat the game. So I'm wondering if you guys have come across any of those issues yourself, or had to redesign things, or heard of other good stories about that and what we can do about it. Is there an issue where you've gone, oh God, I made a game that taught people the wrong thing. What do I do? You can't take it off the market if it's already out there.
I've experienced it more anecdotally with this playtesting, and the most clear ones is with the It Takes a Village, where we are trying to get people to collaborate and overcome challenges and survive. And being a collaborative game, I mean, it happens in other collaborative games, but you get that alpha gamer kind of person who takes control of everyone and tells everyone what to do scenario. And I've had different iterations where I've put rules in to try and stop it. I've had other iterations where I've just let it happen naturally and then try to discuss it afterwards. Like, how did this make you feel? But it's even that is an issue. And there's all obviously levels of other systems that I put in, like, if I have money in the game, how is it being used and what is it saying? Am I saying that money is the solution to everything? And like all these other things. And every time, if you have any form of scoring, then, what are the implications of whatever that thing is that's scoring, and I find that for me, it's with this, because this game is still in development, I just try and learn from each playtest at each time I bring it to people and kind of go, okay, what have I missed? What is my tunnel vision not seeing, or what is other people's experiences highlighted? And it's tricky though, but it's definitely an ongoing learning thing.
Yeah, there was a case at one of the hospitals where a doctor engaged in some pretty serious malpractice in the game, and that was potentially fatal, but he didn't actually kill the patient. And that was kind of interesting to work through that. Any answer that you come up with to any of these things has to be really specific. And so ideally what you do is you test it well enough and you have enough safeguards in place that that you've got some idea of what's happening on a limited scale. Find your mistakes in private if you can. Test things.
Well, I might transition there to a final checkout from each of you. So the prompt is, what are you most excited about in the future of serious games? Where do you most want to see them go? And I'll start just as an example, because I think, where there's an expectation we'll see, especially with video games and virtual reality, more immersive, more high fidelity simulations. But my interest is almost in more the lo-fi direction, because I see that avid gamers, game designers, game masters who run role-playing games have this incredible set of capabilities that combine facilitation, imagination, simulation. They're doing things that, very well-trained facilitators still struggle to do. And so I would love to see somehow us providing that wrapper piece that goes around a game about how do you do a debrief and how do you connect it up, how do you make sure you get the behavior change right. I want to see that sort of trickling out more to the tabletops around the world, and that I think would actually be really generative in seeing lots of people getting things done in their local community, in their organization, and bringing about kind of a wave of change. That's my exciting vision for the future, and in a sense why I'm here facilitating this panel. Anyone else ready to pop on this one?
On that note, I think being aware, like as you said, of how games can be transformative, trickling down into that, so that the people who play games have a sense of the skills that they have and the things that they're doing and the impact that they can have, even if it's just with each other. But also then, what skills do I have because of this? And what skills, can I get better at understanding games and playing games, not so much as winning them, but as playing them more pro-socially. I'd like, a sense of that sort of literacy of interpretation and understanding would be great for all games. And just, like letting people explore that a little bit, like we have sort of with book clubs and stuff. It's not just like just read a book, but let's talk about how we interact with media and being an aware and enlightened and engaged participant in games would be great. And then pulling that into an understanding of all the other things that games touch. That was very vague, but I think that's a really important thing, is that not just about building games into tools and using games to talk about other subjects, but just bringing that kind of awareness into every game we play and how we interact and how we think about it.
Yeah, that was going to be my answer, is where would I like to see this all go, is I want to see there actually not be a distinction between serious and non-serious games. I just want them all to be meaningful and to have meaningful thought processes behind why they're made, meaningful outcomes about what they're trying to achieve, and that they can have the power to achieve things. It's not just about mindless fun, or it's not just about generating revenue. That's kind of my utopia, would be that it's all kind of more, I guess, deep.
Mm-hmm.
Nick?
Yeah, I'd love to speak to a similar sort of thing. Hailey, I'd love to see facilitators and sort of this very let's say psychological humanistic element be brought into facilitating gameplay. And to what Eris said of blurring that line, it's my personal philosophy that that sort of life is a game in that there are mechanics that you play and there are rules that you play. And so to have this distinction of okay, now I'm going to go and play a video game and just have that as a completely separate thing from, okay, now I'm going to go and figure out how to get my driver's license, to realize that, games can be allegory. They can be allegorical. They can be symbolic. And that, for example, in escape rooms, going into an escape room and being put into the shoes of a certain individual and then being asked to make decisions as that individual can have real implications on who you are as a personality and as a human being. And that when you step out of the game and go, okay, I'm no longer playing that character, you actually have something, you have an experience with you of but I'm changed now. I've seen the world through a different lens, and games offer us that. So I would love to see games broaden out to be something that are seen as actual transformative tools that we can use, and not just escapism entertainment.
I'm going to disagree, sort of. Which is you guys are talking about how you'd love to see that in the future. I believe that that's what's happening right now. I think that this panel is a fantastic example of the way that these connections are being made. And if you look at the engagement we're getting from the fantastic people in the chat, then I see all that as already happening. So what I would like to see in future is game design skills being applied more broadly. I mean, what is game design? It's structuring an activity so that the activity is inherently rewarding. Wouldn't it be nice if managers had game design skills? Wouldn't it be great to see a bit more work design taking place? And have workplaces that are informed by the possibility that you can actually look at how an activity is taking place and have that become more rewarding. You guys have got all that other stuff under control. I'm gonna pursue the work design stuff and see if I can get anything to do with that.
Yeah, Nick, I would just replace the game design skills with facilitation skills, and I've said those sentences about 1,000 times. Well, thank you, panelists, as well as participants in the chat, for really going there with us on this alternative format. The map is beautiful. It's more rich than I really imagined it would be, and just love to see the ongoing curation of it and that this worked. So I think we met our win condition for this panel. We didn't build in the debrief. Maybe we'll do that offline.
Yeah.
And so hopefully this artifact, maybe we can find a way for it to live alongside the other outputs from the festival. So thanks to the panelists, thanks to the chat. Give yourselves a round of applause. And I guess we'll
Thanks,
call
everyone.
it there. Go out and make some not so serious games.
Was it Oscar Wilde? Life is too important to be taken seriously.
Yes.